The film opens with the word on screen, fetch. In old Irish folklore, a fetch is a shadowy spirit that appears as a living person's exact double, a perfect twin, but not human. Legends say that spotting your own fetch is a warning. It means death may be close. How this eerie idea connects to the story will unfold soon. The story flashes to a chilling memory. A young boy, Nick, hides in terror with a baseball bat, convinced his grandmother wants to harm him. Suddenly, a mysterious hand yanks him away, and the scene cuts to black. Years later, Nick is grown, married to Charlie, and a devoted father to their little boy, Jacob. Life seems perfect. Nick paints for a living, while Charlie has a thriving career. But tragedy strikes. One day, while Charlie is at work, Jacob slips on the stairs while carrying a pumpkin. His loose shoelaces trip him, and he falls to his death. The loss shatters Nick and Charlie's world. Nick spirals into despair, nearly ending his own life, before Charlie stops him. He spends a month in a hospital, stabilizing but never the same, and a quiet distance grows between them. After discharge, Charlie takes Nick to his late grandmother's house, now in his name, to pack belongings and recover, planning to sell it. She must return to work, leaving Nick alone to heal. Charlie also arranges therapy with psychiatrist Andrew Beaumont, known for using hypnosis to help patients break addictions. At first, Nick resents the sessions and acts cold, but he knows Charlie means well. Andrew's calm, friendly approach soon proves he's genuinely dedicated to helping his patients. Before leaving, Charlie shares an emotional goodbye with Nick. She tells him to learn to live with himself and move forward. Her way of saying that if Nick wants their marriage to survive, he must find a way to carry his grief and rebuild a normal life. Before Jacob died, Nick had been painting his son's portrait, but never finished it. Now, alone in his grandmother's house, he decides to complete the painting in Jacob's memory. Nick takes his medication as directed by Dr. Andrew Beaumont, but being in that house is unsettling. Childhood trauma still lingers. Something terrible once happened here. That night, Nick hears strange sounds he thinks belong to his grandmother. Peering out the window, he suddenly feels grabbed, then wakes up. It was only a nightmare, but it shakes him. The next morning, Andrew visits unexpectedly and asks how Nick is doing. Nick insists he slept well and feels fine, but Andrew sees through the lie. Nick is clearly trying to avoid therapy. When Andrew presses, Nick snaps that Andrew can't understand trauma just because of a degree. Calmly, Andrew reveals his own pain. His daughter died tragically 3 years ago. The confession leaves Nick silent. Nick's fragile mind begins to play tricks on him. During sessions, he hears disturbing, taunting voices that seem to come from Andrew, but they're only in his head. When Nick snaps, Andrew calmly reminds him that mental illness isn't his fault, yet recovery is his responsibility. For now, Andrew ends the session, planning to return for more visits. On his way out, Andrew meets a neighbor, Shelby, who has lived there for years. She recalls that Nick moved in as a child after his parents died in a car accident, and that his grandmother later passed from a heart attack. It's been so long she remembers little else, but Andrew leaves his card in case more details surface. Meanwhile, Nick packs up the house. Realizing he needs groceries, he heads to the market, where unsettling whispers echo in his mind. Dark, negative thoughts about himself. He tries calling Charlie, but the call goes to voicemail. Back home, Nick bakes Jacob's favorite cookies, flooded with memories of his son. Later, after taking his medication, he turns to finish Jacob's unfinished portrait. But when he touches the photo, Jacob's face mysteriously disappears from the photo, leaving Nick deeply shaken. That night, Eerie sights begin to unfold. Every framed photo on the walls hangs upside down, and Nick glimpses his grandmother in a terrifying state. Then he sees something worse, a dark, twisted fetch, his own double. Whether this fetch is real or just a creation of Nick's unraveling mind is a mystery the film won't reveal until the end. Nick is horrified when he sees the fetch holding Jacob, without a face. The creature throws the boy down the stairs, and Nick races to save him, but slips and falls himself. After regaining his senses, he spends the entire night painting in a frenzy, though we never see what he creates. The next morning, Dr. Andrew arrives and speaks with neighbor Shelby. She recalls that on the night of Nick's grandmother's fatal heart attack, a young, frightened Nick came to her door muttering strange words like, "Grandma, fetch." After the death, the house was left in chaos, as if something violent had happened inside. Nick's mental state continues to unravel. He keeps spotting his doppelganger and even notices brief changes in his own body. At one point, it seems a finger turns black. Andrew helps him pack, treating Nick less like a patient and more like a friend, hoping to guide him through the growing darkness. Nicholas sends Andrew to the basement for a box of books. On the way, Andrew peeks into Nick's room and notices a chair jammed against the closet door, clear proof that Nick is far more frightened than he admits. Among the books, Nick discovers one about the fetch legend. Later in the attic, he again hears voices urging him to end his life and even sees a hanging noose. He tries to convince himself it's all in his mind, until the twisted, bent form of the fetch appears, seeming to overpower him. Andrew arrives just in time, snapping Nick back to reality. When Andrew asks about the book, Nick explains that his grandmother used to tell him fetch stories when he was a child, and Andrew realizes how those old tales have rooted themselves deep in Nick's troubled mind. Andrew realizes the crushing guilt Nick carries. We see a flash of Nick scrubbing Jacob's blood from the stairs, as if he could erase the tragedy itself. Nick confesses he hears voices and sees things too strange to describe, convinced no one can understand. Andrew gently shares his own pain. His job once kept him from spending enough time with his daughter, who later died by self-harm. He explains he could have blamed himself forever, but chose not to, and urges Nick to stop punishing himself the same way. Before leaving, Andrew promises to return that night, not as a doctor, but as a friend. Talking openly leaves Nicholas feeling, for the first time, a small sense of relief. After Andrew leaves, Nicholas returns to Jacob's portrait, but he still can't remember his son's face. A sudden jolt makes him turn, and for an instant he sees Jacob quietly playing behind him. When he looks again, Jacob is gone, and the portrait is smeared. Frantic, Nick checks every photo in the house and finds Jacob's face erased from them all. Then, a child's voice calls from downstairs. As Nick moves toward it, a nearby window shatters. The twisted fetch tries to climb inside, grinning as Nick screams. He jolts awake, only to see the glass really is broken. Later, neighbor Mrs. Shelby notices Nick staring silently from his window, ignoring her calls, unsettled by his blank gaze. Meanwhile, Andrew meets with Charlie and explains the old legend. In folklore, seeing one's fetch is an omen of death. He believes that as a child, Nicholas absorbed these stories from his grandmother. When she became ill, young Nick imagined her fetch and even told Shelby that the grandma in the house wasn't real. Now, Jacob's death has reawakened that buried trauma. Nicholas believes the stories are real and is sliding toward self-harm. Andrew warns Charlie that they must help Nick confront these delusions before they destroy him. But real progress can only happen if Nicholas wants help himself. Alone in the house, he hears the voices again, loses control, and forcefully hits his head on the floor. Injured and terrified, he sees strange visions, gripping Charlie's wedding ring for strength. He screams, and the scene cuts. Later, when Charlie calls, Nick sounds perfectly calm, almost cheerful, which unsettles her. When Andrew arrives, Nick acts the same way. Andrew, sensing a facade, notices the fresh injuries and asks about them, but Nick deflects. Andrew warns that nothing will improve if Nick keeps lying and shows him the Fetch folklore book. Nick snaps, accusing Andrew of pretending to be a friend. Andrew then gives him a sedative and begins a hypnosis session. Nick drifts into the night of his grandmother's death, describing how young Nicholas ran to Shelby's house, until the dark Fetch suddenly appears, urging him to die. As the vision spirals, Andrew panics and wakes him. Shaken and frightened, Nick repeats, "I caused my son's death," before passing out. Seeing the fresh injuries worsen, Andrew calls Charlie, telling her the situation is far more serious than he feared and urging her to come immediately. The next day, Charlie visits. Nicholas is delighted to see her, but she's alarmed by his fresh injuries and urges a doctor's visit. He insists he's fine, though the haunting voices still echo in his mind. Neighbor Shelby stops by to talk with Charlie, and Nicholas rushes downstairs, accidentally dropping Charlie's wedding ring in his haste. He doesn't want Shelby sharing anything about his condition. While they talk, Nick suddenly sees Jacob's face in Shelby's young grandson and tries to take the boy away. Charlie slaps him to snap him out of it and quickly pulls him inside. Charlie can't make sense of what's happening. Suddenly, Nicholas snaps, accusing her of keeping him from their son. The Fetch whispers for him to end his life, and Nick warns Charlie to leave before he loses control. As he struggles against the apparition, the mirror behind him shatters. Terrified, Charlie runs. Alone, Nick's torment escalates. He writhes in pain, and for a horrifying moment, a dark hand seems to push out from inside his body. Meanwhile, Charlie calls Andrew. Together, they return to the house, now eerily dark, with strange painted lines on the walls, a noose hanging from the ceiling, and unsettling, demonic sketches. Suddenly, Nicholas calls out, and before they can respond, a shadowy hand grabs him and drags him back into the darkness, as if the nightmare has stepped into reality. Andrew and Charlie now see the Fetch themselves. Andrew urges Nicholas to fight, insisting the creature isn't real. The Fetch attacks, knocking Andrew unconscious and lunging for Charlie. To protect her, Nicholas offers himself, begging the entity to let her go. The Fetch strikes him, but Nick forces it back into his own body. Still struggling for control, he tells Andrew and Charlie to leave. Charlie pleads with him to keep fighting. Andrew regains consciousness and realizes what Nick must do: face his deepest fear. "If you're ready to die," Andrew tells him, "then face it head on." Nicholas climbs onto a chair and slips the noose around his neck. Andrew reminds him the power is his alone and begins a hypnosis session. Nick's mind drifts into a ruined memory, then back to his house, where he sees Jacob and follows him upstairs. Andrew senses something important and sends Charlie to that room. There she finds a family photo from their day at the pumpkin patch, the very memory Nicholas is reliving. When Andrew asks what he sees, Nick whispers that Jacob is standing right in front of him. But Nicholas still can't picture Jacob's face. Charlie comes downstairs and gently reminds him what their son looked like. Slowly, the memory returns, and Nick sees Jacob at the pumpkin patch, smiling back at him. Andrew reassures him that the tragedy wasn't his fault. It was a terrible accident. Nicholas accepts this truth, apologizes to Jacob for not saving him, and in his vision, Jacob forgives him. The crushing guilt finally begins to lift. Yet, one final step remains: breaking free from the fetch. Andrew fears the entity might harm Nick and urges him to wake, but Nicholas chooses to face it. When the dark double appears, a violent struggle begins as Nick fights to end its hold on him. The fetch lunges and tries to strangle Nicholas. Thinking fast, Nick slips the noose from his own neck and throws it over the creatures. The fetch thrashes as it hangs, a powerful symbol of Nick choking the life out of his fear and trauma. He snaps back to consciousness, surrounded by Andrew and Charlie, all of them deeply moved. Time passes. Nicholas continues therapy with Andrew to fully heal. In the final scene, he gives Charlie a new painting of Jacob, this time with their son's face lovingly complete. Charlie smiles, knowing Nick is finally recovering. The film closes on this truth. Everything Nicholas experienced was born of grief and trauma, not the supernatural. The twin ultimately stands as a psychological story of confronting guilt and reclaiming life.